Hello, and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. I'm taking your advice. I'm talking about this in the beginning of the video and at the end. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to support me. If you really want to support me, you can join my Patreon. We have a big goal there that I will talk about at the end of the video. Today, I have for you a story about creepy, crawly, slimy creatures of different varieties. I have a story about secrets and about lies and about greed. Sounds familiar, right? This story is like so many others we talk about here in the true crime community. It's about a family that looks like it has the world by the tail, that looks like they're successful and happy and just killing it in life on the outside. But what's going on behind closed doors is much different from our perception. That's the case a lot of the time. But it's even worse when one of the people behind those closed doors isn't aware that things aren't going well in their life. Today we are talking about a very devious and evil woman who thought she was smarter than she is and more charming than she is, and she decided that she would use her feminine wiles to fix some things in her life that she wasn't happy about. This family worked with reptiles every day, but the most cold-blooded thing in their lives was living in the house with them. This is the story of Ben and Lynlee Renick, the story of the Snake Man murder. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's get into it. June 8th, 2017. It is a hot summer day in Montgomery County, Missouri. A call comes into the local sheriff's department. Everyone in the area is aware that there is a very large reptile breeding facility nearby, and everyone knows that because the man who owns it and operates it, Ben Renick, has become quite famous in the world of herpetology. The caller is Sam Renick, Ben's brother, and he tells the 911 dispatcher that Ben has been found dead and that they believe he has been bitten by a poisonous snake, one of his own snakes. Sam also says it looks like his brother's head has been crushed. Officers arrive and do a walkthrough of the facility. They see that Ben is, in fact, dead on the floor of his building, and there is blood at the scene as well. Ben's brother, Sam, leads the officers through the snake breeding facility and tells them something must have bitten him and crushed his skull. So he says, "There's a large snake on the loose in here. There has to be. Watch your ass." Coroner Dave Colbert arrived at the crime scene and began to do his investigation. So the officers are walking through this facility. One or two of them have admitted they're terrified of snakes. They've got their guns out, they're looking for this big snake, and the coroner is over with the body. And as he begins to examine the body of Ben Renick, and as the CSI agents start to take some photos, the coroner sees something. He sees this right here, a shell casing on a shelf above Ben's head. Dave Colbert later said, "When I saw that shell casing on the shelf, I knew this death was not from a snake. Ben Renick had been murdered, shot multiple times." As the body is examined, it is discovered that Ben Renick has 8 bullets in his body, and one of those shots was a contact wound. Ben's killer had held the muzzle of the gun right next to his head and pulled the trigger. Immediately, theories began to form. This is rural Missouri. Drugs are made on farms in rural Missouri. Perhaps someone went to the wrong place, thinking it was a drug den. Perhaps someone went there thinking there would be a lot of cash in the building because of drugs. Maybe someone was there for some very expensive snakes, and they didn't think Ben would be in the building after 6 that evening. Who in the world would walk into this world-renowned facility and execute this mild-mannered husband and father? Then investigators started talking about Frank Renick and the criminal case against him. Frank was Ben and Sam's father. Could this murder be some sort of revenge for what Frank did? We'll talk about that in a moment. Let's go back in time just a bit so we can take a better look at what led to this tragic event. Ben and his brother Sam grew up on their family's farm in Missouri. Their father Frank started a pet food company, and it did very well. Ben and Sam were spoiled as children. They always had the newest toys, the best electronics. Their parents made sure they had everything a kid could ever want. The family was wealthy, and they were well known. Their eccentricities were well known as well. They were a bit different, and both Kim and Frank, Ben's parents, were alcoholics. The family speaks openly about the struggles that both Frank and Kim, the mother and the father, had with alcohol. In the early 1990s, the Renick family home literally exploded. It blew up. And when it did, it was a massive explosion. There were fire trucks brought in from a neighboring state. That's how big the fire was. No one was home at the time this happened. So it's just another thing that was a little bit strange about this family, added to the overall mystique of this different family living out in the middle of nowhere. They looked into whether or not the fire was arson, but they couldn't prove it, and the family went on with their lives. But in 2012, Frank Renick was suddenly arrested, and everyone who knew him was shocked. Apparently, for years, Frank had been getting people to invest millions of dollars in his pet food company, Spectrum Pet Foods, but the money wasn't going into the company, it was going into Frank's pockets. It was basically a pyramid scheme, and several people lost millions of dollars. As soon as the indictment came in, 62-year-old Frank Renick took a gun and killed himself on Father's Day. Ben and Sam were devastated by the death of their father. Ben found comfort in the arms of a new girlfriend, Lynlee Gallatin. Ben's friends say he fell madly in love with Lynlee. They were both in their early 20s at the time, and they shared a lot of the same interests. Lynlee had a young son from a previous relationship, and Ben took to fatherhood right away. He stepped in and treated Matthew as if he was his own son, and by all accounts, Ben was a wonderful father to the young boy. About 18 months into the relationship, Lynlee became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. When Emma was 2 years old, in 2014, Ben and Lynlee got married. You can see their small and intimate ceremony here that was attended by a few friends and family members. As Ben and Lynlee were working on their business and their family, and with Ben and Sam's father now dead, Ben began to use some of the large buildings on the farm property for snake breeding. Ben had always been very interested in snakes. He was smart and he was detail-oriented, and he had a very intuitive way of understanding the genetics involved in snake breeding. Now, I know absolutely nothing about snakes or snake breeding, so of course I had to dive in and do some research. Apparently in snake breeding, it's all about the designer skin you can create on the snake by knowing which snakes to breed together. The industry has become so designer that people can actually make requests like, hey, I'd like a pink and purple python. And the snake breeder who understands the genetics will breed together the right snakes to get a pink and purple python. Now, this is not cheap. These snakes go for like $20,000. It's a very, very expensive hobby, and apparently there are trade shows and conventions, and people spend lots and lots of money to get the snake that they have designed and hired a breeder for, and Ben Renick was very good at this. Ben liked to do all of the work on his own. He didn't have a bunch of employees. He was very hands-on, and the only person that ever helped him in his business was Lynlee. She would often film Ben talking about snake breeding, and they would post the videos to YouTube and Facebook, showing potential buyers the facility and how the breeding process took place. They took pictures of themselves holding large clutches of eggs. They showed the incubators and the rows and rows of drawers full of snakes. Now again, I admittedly know nothing about snakes, but I do love animals, and I have to tell you, I was not in love with the looks of this setup. Don't snakes need some space? Don't all animals need some space? Are the snakes kept in these drawers for very short amounts of time only? I certainly hope they're not living for weeks and months in a tiny drawer. That seems very cruel to me. So if you know anything about snakes or snake breeding, please feel free to chime in the comments. I'm not trying to be overly critical of something I know nothing about. I'm just telling you my knee-jerk reaction to seeing rows and rows of living creatures in tiny little drawers was not great. The facility is immaculate. You can tell Ben really loved what he was doing. This place is so tidy and well organized. It's very impressive. And the couple, they were making money hand over fist. Ben and Sam's mother, Kim, falls ill and she passes away. I found a lot of differing information on exactly how this went down, but Kim really left the property in Ben's hands. Sam says he promised his mother that they would hold on to the property and keep it in the family so that their kids, Kim's grandkids, would always have it. But behind the scenes, there was apparently some tension between Ben and Sam about the way all of this went down. Sam felt slighted that his mother had left either the majority of the property or all of the property to Ben and left him in charge. But regardless of that, Sam and his wife and their kids lived on the property along with Ben and Lynlee and their kids. This is a large parcel of property. It's 72 acres, so there's more than enough room for everyone, and they each had a house. They'd get together on the weekends and spend time together as a family. It wasn't as though they weren't speaking, but there were some hard feelings between Sam and Ben, or maybe just from Sam towards Ben and his parents, the way he was left nothing and Ben was given everything. That seems pretty harsh. Before Ben and Lynlee got together, Lynlee worked as a massage therapist. And now that Ben's business was up and running and the family was making a lot of money, she wanted to get back into that business. But she didn't just want to go and get a job as a masseuse. Lynlee wanted to open her own spa. Now, I know a little something about this business. Years ago, I opened a salon with a good friend of mine and we offered some day spa services. You really have to be in the right location with the right people at the right time to operate a successful spa. Backwoods, Missouri, farmland, rural Missouri, this isn't going to be the place you're going to want to open a day spa. But Lynlee was set on doing this, and after some talking to, she decided that she would open the spa in Columbia, which was about an hour away from where they lived. Now, my husband's family lives in Columbia, Missouri, and my husband went to Mizzou in Columbia on a tennis scholarship, so I am quite familiar with Columbia. It's definitely a better location for a spa than the farmlands the Renicks were living on. So Lynlee goes and finds a location and she hires some contractors. They come in, they remodel the building, they do the plumbing and all the work that is necessary for the spa. And she opens this little beauty salon and spa with Ben's help. Ben gave her quite a bit of money for this. She calls the place Ascensia. So now the Renicks are running the snake breeding company. They're traveling to trade shows. They're even involved in legislation about the trading of exotic animals. And now they've got this spa, which is an hour away from their home and their facility. So they were busy, to say the least. From the outside, it appeared as though they were at the top of the world. They've got money, they've got property, they've got 2 beautiful children, they've got businesses that are raking in cash, they've got the world notoriety. It looks like they've got it all. But Lynlee Rennick has even more. She has secrets, and they're big ones. 2016. Lynlee Rennick was a busy woman running her spa and helping her husband run his snake breeding business. But that wasn't the only reason she was busy. Lynlee Rennick had boyfriends. That's multiple boyfriends. Lynlee was having an affair with this man, Brandon Blackwell. Ben knew nothing about this affair. Lynlee was also seeing Michael Humphrey. Lynlee is, she's got energy to burn, apparently, because as Lynlee works at the spa, she becomes good friends with this woman named Ashley Shaw. So Lynlee, Ashley, and Michael Humphrey, her lover, are spending a lot of time together an hour away from home in Columbia. And before long, Lynlee tells the other 2, her friends, that she has a plan. Lynlee wants to kill her husband. She tells her friends she's been in an unhappy marriage for a long time, and with Ben gone, everything the couple owns will become hers. Ben's got life insurance, she can sell his business for millions, and she tells Ashley and Michael that they will be paid well for their help and for their silence. Lynlee said she didn't want to divorce Ben because she was afraid he would take the kids from her. She wanted the kids, she wanted his $1 million life insurance policy, and she wanted to sell that snake breeding business. The first plan they come up with is so dumb and so poorly thought out, but it really doesn't surprise me with these types. The more I researched these 3, we are not dealing with the brain trust here, okay? The first time Lynlee tried to kill Ben, she ground up 15 Percocet pills that she got from Ashley, and put them in a protein shake for Ben. First off, I can't believe he drank it because it had to have tasted terrible. Also, if it had worked, which obviously it didn't Lynlee think there would be an autopsy? She was probably planning on saying it was a suicide, that Ben had taken the pills himself. I think ahead all the time now what the excuses are going to be because we see them all the time. But at any rate, all this protein shake did was make Ben very, very sick. But for whatever reason, as we sometimes see in the true crime community, some of the craziest and most poorly planned murders go unsolved for years, sometimes just out of pure dumb luck. And that's exactly what happened here. Ben is shot and killed in 2017, but police cannot find a suspect for the shooting. Now, of course, they interviewed Lynlee over and over. She tells them that she was at the spa and she got a call saying that Ben had never shown up to pick the kids up from daycare. So Lynlee tells the police that she left the spa and went to pick up the kids, and then she went home. She claims she walked into the snake breeding facility at about 6:30 p.m. and found Ben lying in a pool of blood. Each time the officers interviewed Lynlee, they found her, quote, very forthcoming. She was emotional and she seemed truly distraught that her husband had been killed, especially in such a violent manner. Of course, the police also spoke with Sam. Sam admitted that yes, there were some hurt feelings over his father and mother's decision to leave the farm solely to Ben. Yes, it bothered him. Yes, he had some resentment. But Sam claimed he loved his brother and would never do anything to hurt him. I tried to find information on whether or not they did gunshot residue tests on Lynlee and on Sam's hands, but I could not. I would hope that they would have performed those tests. But who knows, some of the stuff we see, right? And later on, it becomes even more important. So the police asked Sam and Lynlee to turn over their social media accounts. They also went through Ben's accounts. They were surprised to find a private message in Ben's account telling a close friend that he thought Lynlee might be cheating on him. No one in Ben's circle had ever heard him talk about this. They were really surprised and they thought if Ben believed that Lynlee was cheating, he would leave. Then, of course, the police find in Lynlee's messages and Facebook messages evidence of her affairs, and they confront her, and she admitted it. But the man that they knew Lynlee was cheating with, this was a different guy, was on a vacation at the time of the murder, and so they knew it wasn't him. They also knew that Lynlee had been at the salon until a certain time, and then of course they knew Sam had been the 911 caller. They even brought Lynlee in for a polygraph in October of 2017, but they kept the results to themselves. Lynlee apparently failed the polygraph. You know how I feel about polygraphs. I think they're junk science, and I don't think anyone should ever take one, but this is what happened. And this was years after the murder at this point. No one was ever told that Lynlee failed the polygraph or that she was even a suspect. The family did have some thoughts about Lynlee, though. When Ben was murdered, Lynlee pretty quickly distanced herself from the family, which they thought was strange. And maybe it was just her way of coping, so they kind of let it go. And then, just 6 months after Ben's murder, Lynlee announces on Facebook that she is in a new relationship and, surprise, she's pregnant with that man's baby. Lynlee then puts the Renick property up for sale while Sam and his family are still living on it, and she gets almost $800,000 for the parcel. The police investigated and did what they could, but they just couldn't seem to find the shooter. The case went cold, and it stayed that way for years, almost 3 years, in fact. But then they got a break, and it was a big one. January 16th, 2020. Without any word or warning to family and friends, Lynlee Renick and Michael Humphrey are suddenly arrested. The police had not told anyone they were closing in on an arrest. Sam was shocked. The Renick family friends were shocked, and word spread like wildfire through this small community about this sudden and very unexpected development. How did this happen? What had changed so drastically that authorities were able to make an arrest? This guy came forward, our friend Brandon Blackwell, the other one of Lynlee's lovers. Lynlee had been sleeping with Brandon while she was still married to Ben, and she continued sleeping with him after Ben was murdered. Brandon is also the father of Lynlee's third child, the one she announced she was having on Facebook, so that's all Brandon. But after this child is born, things begin to go sour between Lynlee and Brandon. And as we often see when relationships fall apart, it isn't uncommon for people holding big secrets to decide to get those secrets off their chests. It's usually more about revenge on the person they've broken up with than it is about doing the right thing. Let's be clear about that. Well, Brandon was holding a big secret. Apparently, Lynlee and Brandon's breakup was very, very nasty. This all sounds high school to me, but apparently there was all this gossip going back and forth between salons and a lot of friend groups. It sounds very juvenile and very ugly. And as it gets worse, Lynlee decides to get a restraining order against Brandon, and that is the straw that breaks the camel's back. Brandon is not going to be kept from his child, and he's done playing these games with Lynlee. So he goes to the police. Brandon Blackwell tells the police that the murder went down like this. Lynlee takes Michael Humphrey, her other boyfriend, to the farm with her on the night of the murder. The two of them arrive, and Lynlee walks Michael into the breeding facility. Ben is there. Lynlee introduces Michael as an old friend who is really interested in snakes, and she tells Ben she's going to show him around. Michael is interested in snakes, all right, that we can agree on. Instead of showing Michael around, he pulled out a gun and handed it to Lynlee, who then shot and killed Ben. This is Brandon's story. According to Brandon, Michael and Lynlee had previously decided that she would be the one to actually commit the murder, and Michael was just there in case anything went wrong. Now, my first thought was, where were the kids during all of this? Because if you remember, Lynlee said she had to go and pick them up from daycare when Ben failed to turn up for them. So did this psychopath just put her kids in the house and then walk out to the industrial building on their property and murder their dad? As word spread of Lynlee's arrest, people were furious. I guess a large portion of the herpetology community had raised tens of thousands of dollars for Lynlee and her kids. They felt so bad for this young mother that had lost her husband, and now she was going to really lose the business because Ben was the business. So they banded together and did all they could to help her. And then to find out that she was under arrest for his murder, they were angry and they felt very betrayed. Oh, and by the way, Brandon also tells the police about the first murder attempt. He tells them about the protein shake, and he tells them that Ashley Shaw, Lynlee's friend, was in on that. So now the police go to Ashley Shaw, and she is not going to jail. Ashley spills it all without any poking or prodding. She takes a plea deal and turns on Lynlee. She tells the police everything they need to know. Ashley tells the police that the spa in Columbia was failing badly. It wasn't making any money. Lynlee was being sued by several of the contractors that had done work on the salon because she never paid them for their services. And she was also being sued by several credit card companies for unpaid bills. Lynlee told Ben about some of the financial problems, and he was very frustrated with her. Lynlee was basically draining tens of thousands of dollars from the snake breeding business, and Ben was not happy about that. Lynlee confided in Ashley that she was worried Ben was going to leave her, and if he did, there was no way she'd be able to keep the spa open or pay any of these bills. And that's when she decided that Ben had to go. The other thing that police learn in their investigation is that Ben had decided he was going to get out of the snake breeding business, at least in the way he was doing it at the time. He actually had made a deal with Robin Liner, who's a professional hockey player on our team, the Golden Knights. Robin Liner was going to buy the business from Ben, and side note, ended up having to declare bankruptcy when the deal collapsed after Ben's death. Robin Liner was going to pay Ben $250,000 per quarter for a year and another quarter. I'm so bad at math. For 5 quarters, Robin Liner was going to pay Ben $250,000, so it'd be like $1.25 million. Well, when Ben was murdered, the courts interceded and put the business into a trust while the investigation took place. So Robin Liner then lost his shirt in the deal. He had already put in like $500,000. That's kind of a side story of, someone being swindled, and I feel really sorry for him. He wasn't really swindled not by Ben, more by Lynlee, but it was just something the courts took the business and wouldn't give it to anyone that was purchasing it. I guess Robin went to court several times and made arguments that, half of it should be his, and he just kind of ended up getting really the short end of the stick on that, and that's hard for him. Seems pretty unfair, and like the courts could have made some sort of a ruling that would have at least found a way to get his money back. Lynlee then tries to get out on bond while she awaits trial. Ashley had got out on bond and Michael had got out on bond, but they weren't the actual murderers. But Lynlee is she's so egotistical that she figures she can try to get out on bond too. Spoiler alert, she does. But as you can see here, they have a hearing over Zoom because of, it was during COVID. Lynlee decides during this hearing that she's going to speak, which is something you should never, ever do. And her attorney should not have allowed her to speak. But Lynlee thinks she's smarter than the attorneys. She thinks she can talk her way out of anything, and she keeps interrupting the judge. But apparently because of COVID, Lynlee is released on bond while she awaits trial. People were really mad about that. Then in late October, Michael Humphrey was convicted of first-degree murder, and he was shocked by that. He had always claimed that he worked with the police, and he said because it wasn't him that shot Ben, he even denied knowing that Lynlee was going to shoot Ben, which I don't believe for a second, but he did not think he was going to get convicted of first-degree murder. So he is going to go away for life, and that is not sitting well with him. Michael decides he's going to go back to the attorneys and try to plea bargain his way to second-degree murder, which would be life with the possibility of parole. Michael tells the courts that if he gets his sentence reduced, he will tell them everything. They make that deal, and Michael Humphrey turns over the murder weapon. The police had never had the murder weapon before. Even though they think Sam called 911 right after the murder, Lynlee and Michael must have been quick enough to get it out of there. Some people are like, was Sam in on it too? He's never been charged with anything. But this is why I was asking earlier on, did they not do a gunshot residue test on Lynlee's hands? Tell me under what circumstance you would show up to a murder, you find out it's a murder with a gun, and the wife who is there when the body is found does not get her hands tested for gunshot residue. In what universe does that not happen? But I still don't have an answer for that. Maybe that's because the police are embarrassed to admit they didn't perform that test. Maybe not. I don't know. But I would certainly like an answer as to why it took 3 years to arrest someone that had just shot a gun 8 times when that person was at the scene of the crime. Look, I know a lot of cops hate us true crime people because they're like, you're Monday morning quarterbacking and all this stuff. But I'm sorry, there's procedures. You guys have a set list of procedures that you're supposed to undertake in this situation. And when that doesn't happen, we have every right to be critical of that. In the end, Lynlee Renick gets sentenced, but she is only sentenced to 16 years in prison. I watched the sentencing and did not really hear why the sentence was so low. I did not get an answer for that in watching it. So I have to assume there was some type of a plea deal. Lynlee Renick will only be in her mid-40s when she is released from prison. She will still have a whole lot of life left. I'd say the men in her circle better watch out, because in this story, the snakes are not the only slimy, creepy crawlers. In fact, if you ask me, the snake's got nothing on Lynlee. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Hit the like button if you liked the video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. It really does help. If you really want to support me and the community, you can join my Patreon. If you join my Patreon, it helps to support the channel, and in the end, it helps us reach our goal, which is to donate money to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that cannot be tested because there's no money to test it. We want to test that DNA to close the case it's associated with, but also to get that perpetrator's DNA in the system to possibly get hits on other cases they may be responsible for. If you can only donate a couple bucks a month, that still helps. I sure appreciate you spending a little bit of your day with me. Your support means the world to me. It's why I'm still here. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.